Let's do this. Turn left. Keep left, and then turn left. Turn left. This is where it ends.
All right. Good evening, everyone. This is John Tapp with the Freightliner FLB. We're going to start with in Kailspell, Montana, where I bought it at. So it is. It was election day. Polls going to be closing soon here in Florida. So, and we're going to start with in Montana, Oklahoma. So let's go get the tires and get the radio on and get moving.
Drive safe.
And this year. One reason for that is the strong support he enjoys among Cuban Americans, a big voting bloc here. Rosalind Moreno said he was there with his wife Maria to vote for change. I asked him, does that mean you're voting for Trump?
No, at all. I want to change from the drama, from the danger, from the hate. That is the change that I want.
Moreno knows most other Cuban Americans don't share his views and his support for Harris.
You know, there is a lot of Cuban. I don't know why. Maybe it's Fidel Castro in his mind. They're always thinking about, they don't think it's Trump versus Harris. They think it's Trump versus Fidel Castro. I don't know why.
Until several years ago, Florida used to be considered a swing state, one almost evenly divided between Republicans and Democrats. But Florida has changed as retirees and other more conservative voters have moved to the state.
Turn left.
Republicans now have 1 million more registered voters than Democrats and control every statewide office. This year, Democrats hope a good turnout could help them unseat incumbent Republican Senator Rick Scott. With the support of the National Party, Democrat Debbie McCarsell-Powell has been running ads targeting the senator and former governor.
Florida's biggest snake isn't in the Everglades. He's in the Senate. Rick Scott.
Scott, one of the richest members of the Senate, has helped fund his own attacks against his opponent.
Debbie McCarsell-Powell, a silly socialist, wrong for Senate.
At the polls in Cutler Bay today, the Trump voters all said they were voting for Scott. Ava Horton said she voted for him because of his support for school vouchers and other educational issues when he was governor and now as senator.
Like he's always been there to make sure things are excluded from what's in our school system, the kind of books they're able to read, the things that are exposed to. So I felt like I went more conservative in that route.
Florida is one of 10 states voting on abortion today. Florida's ballot measure, if approved, would have returned the state's current ban on abortions after 6 weeks. Janine Gomez is a Trump voter and one of several I spoke to who said she was voting for the measure.
You should be able to make your own decisions about your body. That's basically how it is. Just because I wouldn't get an abortion doesn't mean the girl standing next to me doesn't deserve to have one if she wants one or needs one, medically speaking.
In other states, voters have approved abortion rights measures when they've been on the ballot since Roe v. Wade was overturned. In Florida, though, ballot measures require the support of 60% of voters to pass. A high bar. Greg Allen, NPR News, Cutler Bay, Florida.
You're listening to All Things Considered from NPR News.
Peter Dow came to the United States right after the Vietnam War. He said the right to vote.
It's 5:44 and this is News 88.7 in depth. I'm Gail DeLauder. It's Election Day and efforts to get Asian American voters to the polls have ramped up this year, especially in North Texas. KERA's James Hartley explains Asian American community leaders want their neighbors to know their votes are their voices.
Peter Dow came to the United States right after the Vietnam War. He said the right to vote has been precious to him since he immigrated. He thinks other Vietnamese Americans feel the same, especially those who have lived without that right.
Especially those who came recently after the April 1975 polar Saigon.
Dow is a host on Voice of Vietnamese Americans on 1600 AM out of Grand Prairie. It's a radio station dedicated to keeping the Vietnamese American community informed and connected. He said votes don't matter when people live in a country with a one-party system, but he says things in America are different.
We have a choice of what we would like our elected officials, serve us. This is the difference.
Asian Americans are the fastest growing voting bloc in the U.S. The number of Asian American and Pacific Islander voters who cast ballots nationally jumped about 10% from 2016 to 2020. The Census Bureau estimates around 1.7 million Texans identified as AA. Some of those voters. With the program primarily in Vietnamese, they can translate questions and answers for listeners. Hosts urge the Vietnamese community in Arlington, Grand Prairie, and Mansfield to get to the polls. And Dow said it's working. On the first day of early voting, lines outside the VBA studio at Asia Times Square polling place in Grand Prairie reached around 100 yards.
Go straight on.
Alice Yee is one person working to ensure Asian Americans in Texas know their voting rights. Yee is the founder of Asian Texans for Justice.
A lot of people saying we're sleepy giants and we got to have time to wake up to be a part of the process and part of the policy-making process.
Yee wants the Asian American community to show elected officials they're paying attention and they'll vote based on what they see. LaShawn Roy coordinates efforts for the group in Arlington and Tarrant County. Her job is to make sure those voices are heard. One key has been in flyers, mailers, and door hangers in Vietnamese, Korean, Chinese, Hindi, and English.
Making sure that people are getting the information they need in a language that isn't necessarily English is so very important. And we're seeing that at these doors.
That language barrier is one thing that causes concern for activists demanding better election accessibility. Yee hopes to see state and county leaders do a better job of making voting possible for those who don't speak English.
We really do need to have a language assistant to help our community to understand what is on their ballot.
While the number of Asian American voters is growing, they're not a monolith. And organizers also said many candidates ignore these communities. That's one reason the nonpartisan Asian Texans for Justice even built an online tool to help. The ballot builder gives voters a chance to see all races, including down ballot contests. Yee said that's just as important as voter education in different languages.
All the positive response we get is really encouraging, so we might continue using those and continue to educate our community about the important election and with their languages.
And she has hope the AAPI community will be more empowered as their share of the electorate continues to grow. I'm James Hartley in Arlington.
This is News 88.7.
PBS NewsHour.
Now more than ever, you need news you can trust. For nearly 50 years, millions have turned to PBS NewsHour for the solid, reliable reporting that has made NewsHour the most objective and credible news program on television. Unbiased, in-depth news that delivers substance over sensationalism, elections, conflict, climate. Trust a news source that cuts through the noise with news that matters. Fair, thoughtful coverage of the events that impact our lives.
PBS NewsHour, weeknights at 6 on Houston Public Media TV 8. Donations come in many forms: a monthly membership, a one-time gift, and that extra vehicle you no longer need. We take any kind of vehicle in any condition. Learn more at houstonpublicmedia.org/cars. And thank you.
Support comes from Scan Health Plan, a not-for-profit offering Medicare Advantage plans to seniors with Medicare in Harris County since 1977. Comprehensive bundle plans to fit a variety of lifestyles. ScanHealthPlan.com. And Shepard Mullen, a global law firm with more than 1,000 lawyers, handling intellectual property, renewable energy transactions, and key litigation for a wide range of industries and businesses in Houston and beyond. More at ShepardMullen.com. And Mercury Chamber Orchestra, presenting English Romantic Strings in November and 2 performances of Loving Clara Schumann in February. All at the Wortham. More at mercuryhouston.org. This is News 88.7. I'm Brenda Valdivia. It's mostly cloudy today. Lows in the low 60s. Tomorrow's high in the mid-80s with mostly sunny skies. You can expect to see a chance of showers starting to brew by tomorrow night and turning into a possibility of thunderstorms by Thursday and Friday. It's currently 78 degrees and mostly cloudy here at the University of Houston. Beltway 8 South westbound at West Air Park Boulevard has an accident. And remember, it's Election Day. You have about 1 hour as polls close at 7 p.m. This is News 88.7.
This is All Things Considered from NPR News. I'm Elsie Chang.
And I'm Ari Shapiro. As many Americans head to the polls to vote today, others are having the polls come to them. We're talking about people in jail, specifically in Colorado. A new state law there requires all jails to offer inmates an opportunity to vote in person. Colorado Public Radio's Benta Berkland reports.
Can you open the door from admin into the hallway, that old tag hallway?
Recently, staff from the Garfield County Clerk's Office in western Colorado brought their voting equipment through a secure entrance into their local jail, getting ready to set up for a day of voting. Inmates were allowed to vote in person in the library or take their ballots back to their cells and put them in drop boxes in their pod later.
This unit here is what we call a ballot marking device. It's the equivalent of like a large iPad, so they mark their votes on the screen, and then it actually prints out a paper ballot.
Under Colorado law, the only people in the justice system who are not allowed to vote are those serving a felony sentence. Lou Valario, the Republican sheriff here, said the vast majority of people in his jail are awaiting trial. And so under the law, they're still innocent and entitled to vote. He said he's happy to give them more chances to do that. It was just a question of figuring out the logistics to maintain security.
And so there were some things that were unique because we were basically allowing something new to sort of penetrate our walls, if you will. But certainly in our jail, we're comfortable with how we worked it out with our clerk and recorder, and safety's not an issue.
Democratic State Senator Julie Gonzalez of Denver was the main sponsor of Colorado's new law. She says so much of criminal justice is focused on punishing people.
When we actually remind folks, hey, look, yes, you have caused harm, and we're going to hold you to account for that, but also your voice still matters. I think that helps to remind an individual in a jail that they still have their humanity.
She notes that 90% of people in jail will eventually return to the community. Jerome Whitfield is voting in Denver's detention center. He says he's been in jail for a few months, and his top issue is affordable housing.
I'm just happy I'm able to participate. I thought my background may prevent me from that, but thank God, by the grace of God and everything else, I'm able to, so make me feel like I'm still involved in the community out there, you know what I'm saying?
Fellow Denver inmate Raul Vidari is voting too. He's 36 years old and says he views casting a ballot as a new beginning.
This is my first time voting, so I'm from Texas, but I've been out here for like 10 years, trying to go back home, and I just got into a bit of a situation, but I'm glad to be in here, get my head right,
For the last decade, Colorado has mailed ballots to all registered voters, and people in jail could also request a ballot. But Amanda Gonzalez, the clerk in Jefferson County, one of the state's largest, said not many inmates actually voted by mail.
Just over 0.5%. In a county where we usually have north of 70% voter turnout, was looking at what are the ways that we can make this better, and I think the obvious answer is an in-person voting option.
The original idea got pushed back from some of the sheriffs who run county jails. They worried about safety and logistics. But so far, counties say it's been going well. For NPR News, I'm Benta Birkeland in Denver.
Today is an important moment with people waiting in lines, channel surfing on their TVs, or even doom scrolling on their phones, wondering who might be running the country the next 4 years. But for those who might want a break from all of that, NPR TV critic Eric Deggans is here with some ideas for what kind of TV to binge on today to get away from it all. Hello, Eric. Rescue us, please.
This is my job. I get paid to watch television.
I love it. You do have the best job. Okay, let's say someone out there wants to jump in right now on a totally new series. Like, where should they even start? What are you excited about?
Okay, Apple TV Plus this week is dropping the final episode of this amazing drama, Disclaimer, and it stars Cate Blanchett as a woman whose perfect life comes apart when somebody publishes a book with an awful secret about her. Now, it's written and directed by Alfonso Cuarón, who's the director of films like Roma and Gravity. And he's got this story full of character, unexpected turns. It's just wonderful. And we've got a scene between Blanchett's character and her husband, who's played by Sacha Baron Cohen, who just found out she cheated on him many years ago.
It was so long ago.
I know exactly what it was. I shared that bedroom with you.
Yes, I know. I should have told you.
As I remember, we were barely making love then anyway. You were bored being the mother. You were bored being married to me. You know, you were bored and you had to get yourself attention.
Now, the show's finale airs on Apple TV Plus this Friday, where we learn things are not quite as they seem in that moment.
I love it. Sounds juicy. We love to see the messy lives of perfect people, don't we?
Exactly.
Okay, what about any comfort TV?
Well, there's this genre of TV I like to call meat and potatoes TV, which is genres we know pretty well, like spy shows or mobster series, but I like better versions. Let's say high-end comfort TV. So here, I would recommend the surprisingly good action series for Paramount Plus called Lioness. Now, Zoe Saldana stars as the leader of this department in the CIA who develops female operatives for undercover work, and she's also balancing being a mom. And Nicole Kidman is her boss. It's awesome. But my biggest guilty pleasure is Sylvester Stallone in Paramount Plus's Tulsa King. Now, Stallone plays this mobster who gets exiled to Oklahoma by his mafia family, and he decides to build a new family out there. And Sly has always been smarter and funnier than I think people give him credit for, and he gets to show that off here by creating this charismatic, lovable, but deadly gangster.
I love that. I'm totally going to tune into that one. Okay, if I just want a really good laugh, like I want to laugh so much that I am crying, tell me something hilarious to watch.
Well, I'm the kind of critic who likes comedies that might also make you sad cry. So,
sad cry?
Top of my list is this criminally underseen series on HBO, Somebody Somewhere, with cabaret star Bridget Everett, who plays this woman who moved back to her small hometown, and she's building new connections with friends and family. Now, the show's final season just started, and I hope lots of people show up for this incredible blend of comedy and touching moments. And I also have Shrinking. This is a comedy on Apple TV Plus with Jason Segel as a therapist climbing out of a serious depression after the death of his wife in a car accident. Yeah, it sounds funny, right? No. But trust me, it is. Because Segel's character is surrounded by these wonderful other characters who are working out their own stuff, played by Daily Show alum Jessica Williams and Harrison Ford. They're wonderfully funny and poignant. The theme of the second season is forgiveness, which kicks in when Ted Lasso alum Brett Goldstein shows up. He's the guy that drove that car that killed Segel's wife, and he wants to talk.
Dang, that sounds intense. You sure I'm gonna laugh?
Trust me, it's super fun.
All right, I trust you. That is NPR TV critic Eric Deggans. Thank you so much, Eric.
Go straight on.
Thank you for listening to All Things Considered from NPR News.
Support for NPR comes from the station and from Imaginable Futures, celebrating the hard work, commitment, and achievements of the 1 in 5 college students who are parents. More at imaginablefutures.com. From ECMC Foundation, whose North Star is to eliminate equity gaps in post-secondary completion by 2040 so that underserved learners have greater opportunity for social and economic mobility. From the Kauffman Foundation, providing access to opportunities that help people achieve financial stability, upward mobility, and economic prosperity, regardless of race, gender, or geography. Kauffman.org. And from the William T. Grant Foundation, supporting research to improve the lives of young people at WTGrantFDN.org.
Houston Public Media brings to you PBS World. Experience the personal connection behind the headlines with programming devoted to telling stories that humanize complex issues. PBS World on TV 8.6 and online at HoustonPublicMedia.org.
It's Election Day. This is News 88.7, and you have 1 hour and 1 minute to get in line to vote if you are registered. Tonight's low will be around 62 degrees, so bring a sweater and mostly cloudy skies. Tomorrow will be high around 80 degrees with mostly sunny skies and a slight chance of showers by tomorrow night, increasing to thunderstorms by Thursday and Friday. It's currently 78 degrees and mostly cloudy here at the University of Houston. 45 North northbound after Lanier Parkway has an accident. Bellway 8 West northbound at Bissonnet Street as well. This is your NPR station, KUHF Houston, News 88.7, a service of the University of Houston. Remember, it's your voice, your vote. It's 6 o'clock.
This is live special coverage of Election Night 2024 from NPR News. I'm Juana Summers.
And I'm Ari Shapiro. It is 7 p.m. on the East Coast, and polls have closed in Indiana, Kentucky, South Carolina, Vermont, and Virginia. Most of the polls in the important swing state of Georgia close at 7 p.m. too. A handful of sites in the Atlanta area will stay open because earlier today they closed temporarily after receiving non-credible bomb threats.
Vice President Kamala Harris will be waiting for returns at a party at her alma mater at Howard University here in Washington, and former President Trump will be at his Mar-a-Lago home in Palm Beach, Florida. Trump voted earlier in the day, and he stopped to answer reporters' questions, including on whether he'd concede the election if he loses.
If I lose an election, if it's a fair election, I'd be the first one to acknowledge it.
Harris spent the day conducting a series of radio interviews, making a surprise visit to DNC headquarters, as well as phone banking.
Hi, it's Kamala Harris. I can't wait for you to grow 10 years more.
All night long, we'll be joined by NPR correspondents in the studio and across the country, and I want to start with NPR senior political editor and correspondent Domenico Montanaro. Domenico, I'm going to ask you for the first of many times tonight, what do we know?
Well, already we know that Donald Trump has won Indiana and Kentucky, according to the Associated Press, who we follow for our calls that will be made all night through the evening. So at this point, Trump will have 19 electoral votes, Harris 3, because she has won in Vermont, according to the AP. So that starts it off. This is expected. We know that they're favored in 43 of the states, and if it all goes that way, it's going to come down to the 7 swing states that we've been talking about throughout this entire campaign, the 3 blue wall states of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, as well as those 4 Sunbelt states of North Carolina and Georgia in the east, and Arizona and Nevada out west.
You use the phrase the Associated Press has called, which we're going to hear a lot tonight. Just to pull back the curtain a bit for listeners, can you explain how NPR calls these races?
NPR doesn't call these races.
Sure.
So the Associated Press calls the races. We contract with the AP, and we follow them. We don't have a decision desk at NPR with a bunch of statistical nerds who are putting this stuff together. I may sound like one, but I'm faking it for the radio. I'm not a real one the way that they are. And you know, the other networks will make calls. You'll see through the night, CNN, NBC, CBS, ABC. They all have their own independent, individual decision desks where they're going to make projections.
Right.
And what the AP tries to distinguish and say, and sometimes this is why they're slower, is that they say that they make calls, not projections. And it's really partially for them to think that they have to be 100% clear that somebody, 100% certain that somebody doesn't have a path to overtake the person who's leading.
Right.
And that's the way they think about this.
And people will remember that 4 years ago, Biden was not declared the winner of the election until the Saturday after election night. So what are we expecting this year?
Well, hopefully it's not Saturday that we're all stuck here sitting around. But, it could be close. I mean, it depends on the margins, and it could take a while, certainly. Obviously, Pennsylvania is the state that a lot of people are looking at. $600 million has been spent in political ads. Over $1 billion have been spent when you factor in Senate races, House races, and races all the way down to county commissioner. First time that more than $1 billion has been spent on ads in one particular state. They count slowly for a lot of their ballots that come in later, so it may take some time. That state is critical to both campaigns because it has the most electoral votes of the 7 swing states, 19 electoral votes.
Everybody knows the polls have been in a near tie for a great deal of this race, and yet it could be a blowout night for either candidate. What are some of the early signs that you're looking for?
Well, I'm looking at some of these states that close early, places like Georgia and North Carolina, which count the vote very quickly. I'm also looking at a state like Virginia, which even though it's a lean Democratic state, the rural Western Virginia part of the state will give us some hints as to whether or not Donald Trump is churning out those rural white non-college voters that he really needs. And since all politics has sort of become national at this point, it may translate to how he's doing elsewhere. Also looking at the sort of area around Richmond and Virginia Beach for those suburbs and whether or not Harris is hitting her marks in those places. And that should tell us something potentially about how she's doing elsewhere. But, Georgia, the Atlanta metro area, all of those growing counties where Biden really ran up the score, we're going to be able to tell maybe a little bit about how she's going to do there. And does Trump blow out the margins in rural areas in North Carolina? Because that was the only state in 2020 where he actually increased his margin with white non-college voters of those 7 swing states. And of course, he won that state, whereas Biden won the other ones where he was able to shrink the margins with white non-college voters.
We've got a big crew of correspondents joining us here in studio. We've got Daniel Kurtzleben, Tamara Keith, Miles Parks, and Deirdre Walsh. Hi to all of you.
Hello.
Hey there.
Hey there.
Tamara Keith, I want to start with you. You have been covering the Harris campaign, and Vice President Harris has really had a remarkably short time to make her case to voters, at least by the way we measure modern presidential campaigns. She had to introduce herself to many voters this summer. What is she saying to convince those people to turn out for her today?
Right, as you say, it has been an incredibly truncated campaign. President Biden dropped out of the race on July 21st. She has not been running for very long. Her message has focused on a few different threads. The idea of freedom is something that she talks about a lot. Reproductive freedom, the abortion issue, but other definitions of freedom as well. She's talked a lot, especially recently, about former President Trump being unfit for office and would be unconstrained, she says, in a second term. And she has focused a lot of her messaging on her own personal story of being from the middle class, saying that, she understands and will be focused on the middle class in a way that Trump wasn't. The outside spending especially has really focused on that message. Driving an economic message. Typically, Democrats don't do well on an economic message, and this is a year where the economy is a very big issue for voters because people are worried about inflation, and Democrats have been trying to inoculate her from that issue by running an ad in various different forms with tape of Trump saying, "You guys are rich as hell," and then various voters saying, "Well, I'm not rich as hell," and there's some evidence that has broken through.
Daniel Kurtzleben, over to you. You have been covering former President Trump and his supporters. I want to talk a little bit about his closing message. How has he been trying to seal the deal with voters?
Well, his closing message, it has really held steady mostly from what he has said throughout the campaign, because he has held steady with his core beliefs of isolationism, of tariffs, and of mass deportations. Those are the cornerstones of his stump speech. Now, that said, in the last week or two, but even more than that, every single day, it seems, there has been a new piece of chaos that has come out of the Trump campaign. In the last week alone, last night, he called Nancy Pelosi a sexist slur that I cannot say on the radio, starts with a B. He suggested it might be okay for someone to shoot at journalists. J.D. Vance said that Kamala Harris is trash. Trump suggested it might be okay to take fluoride out of the water. He had some violent imagery in talking about Liz Cheney. He said he's going to protect the women whether they like it or not. I mean, I could go on, but I won't. Yeah, it really is, yes. And so you might say that this is obscuring his central message. I'm sure his advisors would say that. Then again, at a certain point, you keep saying stuff like this, the chaos, the misogyny, the racist remarks, eventually they kind of are the message.
Deirdre Walsh, I want to turn to you. You are one of our congressional correspondents. We've been talking a lot about who wins the White House, but that's not all this election is about, of course. Balance of power in both the House and the Senate are at stake tonight. A lot of interesting races. Give us a preview of what you're watching.
Right. I mean, both chambers have very narrow majorities. Republicans have a 4-seat majority, meaning Democrats would need to pick up a total of 4 to flip control. Unlike the presidential race, where we've really been focused on the 7 purple swing states, balance of power in the House is probably going to come down to a couple of blue states. New York and California are home to clusters of some of those competitive House races. Pack your patience when it comes to the House of Representatives, because it could take days, maybe even weeks. It takes them a while to count in a lot of those tight California races, so we could be waiting for a while to learn who controls the House. In terms of the Senate, it's a 51-49 Democratic majority now. It's a really tough map for Democrats this cycle. We could know much sooner in terms of the Senate. Already Republicans are positioned to pick up a seat in West Virginia, where Joe Manchin is retiring. And in another red state, John Tester, the Democratic senator from that state, is running in a really tough re-election in a state that Trump has won by double digits. He is going to need voters in that state to ticket split to get another term. And then we have the rest of the competitive races, which is really where Democrats are playing defense. A lot of them are in some of those swing states that Domenico was talking about. Blue wall states like Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, another closely contested race in Nevada. So those races could be tied to the top of the ticket.
Miles Parks, over to you. You are a voting correspondent. I know you are watching how people are voting, among a lot of other things. What can you tell us?
Well, so voting happened today across 10,000 voting jurisdictions, and overall, experts seem really thrilled with how voting went today. Obviously, anytime this many people are doing the same thing on the same day, there will be some issues, and we've seen some of those issues. I think the most prominent one we've seen is bomb threats in a number of states that the FBI says seem to have come from Russian domain addresses. We've seen them in Arizona, Wisconsin, and Georgia, notably. Though I will say even those have been pretty isolated to a few precincts. We saw some evacuations in Georgia, but those don't seem to have disrupted voting for longer than an hour.
All right, just to recap, the small amount of information we have so far is a few polls have closed at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump has won Kentucky and Indiana. Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris has won Vermont. And let's go to our White House correspondent, Deepa Shivram, who is at the Harris campaign's election night headquarters at Howard University here in Washington, D.C. Hi, Deepa. Do we have Deepa Shivram with us on the line? Oh, there you are. Okay, there's a bit of a delay on your line, but tell us how they chose to spend election night at Howard.
Well, look, Howard is a really personal place for Kamala Harris. This is her institution where she went to get her college degree. She moved here when she was, a young adult, and really found a lot of her identity here, and also found connections that, have really stayed a big part of her identity her whole career. This is where she pledged her sorority, Alpha Kappa Alpha. She interned on Capitol Hill when she was at Howard. She was protesting things like apartheid on the National Mall. And she here really decided to become a lawyer. And, there's so many elements of her history and her experience at Howard University that have stayed such a big part of her identity. And one thing I was really thinking about today, Ari, is that, this is a person who's from California, has West Coast roots. She really didn't move to Washington until she was elected to the Senate, and that was in 2016. So it's not like she has, a base here on the East Coast, a base here in Washington to come rally to. to, but Howard is home for her. And so as she kind of, had to pick an election night watch party location, Wilmington was, her campaign headquarters is there, inherited from, of course, President Biden, but that is not a personal location for Kamala Harris. And here on Howard's campus, it really is the stage that I'm looking at right now is still kind of being set up, but it is in front of Crampton Auditorium. And Kamala Harris has written in her memoir and mentioned many times that this is the place that, orientation takes place at. And this is where, she really figured out a huge part of herself and her identity. And of course, she made history, becoming the first vice president to graduate from an HBCU, a historically black university. And if she wins this race, she would make history once again in that role as president. So definitely something that has both been very personal for her and, of course, a big part of the Biden-Harris policy agenda. Investing in HBCUs has been a big contribution that Harris has focused on in her time as vice president as well.
We'll be hearing more from Deepa Shivram, our correspondents spanned out across the country tonight. But Miles Parks, I want to come back to you here in studio. I know it's still early in the night. We're learning a lot more information. But from what we know right now, what do we know about how turnout numbers look today compared to past years?
Yeah, I think it's still election officials and, turnout experts still need to look at all the numbers that come in from election day, because half the country still votes on election day, right? But early in-person voting this election broke turnout records. It was the highest early in-person vote total we've ever seen. And so I think right now, from what I've seen, it looks like turnout is going to be somewhere between 2016 and 2020 totals, with looking closer to 2020 at this point.
And Miles, just quickly, is there one difference you might point out from the vote counting process this year compared to 2020 or 2022?
I think the biggest thing in terms of things being faster, Michigan now allows its clerks to count process vote by mail ballots before election day. That's going to speed things up there, but those changes have not been made in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, so vote by mail still takes a while to count there.
Stay with us. There's a lot more to come tonight. Polls have just begun closing, and we will keep tabs on all the results as they're coming in. You're listening to live special coverage from NPR News of Election 2024. Now let's bring in Democratic Congressman Robert Garcia, who represents Long Beach, California. He's the national co-chair of the Harris-Walz campaign. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Tell us what you have seen today that you think could be most relevant to how tonight and the counting of results is going to go.
Well, I think there's a couple things that we're feeling really good about. What we're seeing definitely in Pennsylvania right now, really long lines, a lot of young people coming out. We're seeing Puerto Ricans and Puerto Rican community just overperforming and really turning out in huge numbers, historic numbers. I think that all bodes very well for Kamala Harris. And so obviously it's going to be a long night. We've got Pennsylvania. Ensure that we count all the votes correctly. Could take us a couple days, but we are very, very heartened by what's happening in Pennsylvania. I'll add that we also see huge numbers of voters in Wisconsin and in Michigan. So it's kind of a little early to tell, where those states are going to end up as it relates to turnout completely. But we're feeling good, and honestly, I think the vice president's going to end up winning all 3 states.
Let me ask you about Latino voters broadly, because each election cycle, this chunk of the electorate grows, and although polls show that a majority of Latino voters still support Democrats, that share has been shrinking. And this year, it looks like Trump could hit a high water mark for a Republican presidential candidate with Latino voters. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, look, I think there's a variety of polling out there that shows where the Latino vote is. Some, Trump might be performing marginally better. Others show, similar results as we did to the last election of President Biden. So I think the vice president clearly is going to win Latinos overwhelmingly. Latinos in the last especially week have been consolidating those who have been undecided behind Vice President Harris. I think you've seen a lot of movement, including in polling that you're seeing to the vice president with Latinos. The reality is we are in the election cycle. As we all know, there's just a lot of misinformation out there. There's still a lot of folks that are struggling, that want to be able to help them with their families. And I think Kamala Harris, of course, has had a shortened campaign window. She's been trying to get the message out as much as possible. Yeah. And I think in these last few weeks, I think she's done just that. So she's going to win Latino votes. substantially, and I suspect it'll be close to the Biden numbers, if not the same.
And of course, in addition to being national co-chair of the Harris-Walz campaign, you are a Democratic member of Congress from California, a state that could determine which party controls Congress. Democrats need to pick up just 4 seats to control the House. What do you think the deciding issues for Californians will be in those key races? In just 30 seconds or so, if you would.
Keep left.
Yeah, I think obviously the economy and making sure that the costs are low is going to be the key issue in a lot of these races. People want to know that the economy will work for them and not working for huge corporations and billionaires. So I think we're going to do well in California. We are definitely going to win some of these California seats, and we'll find out probably and still in a couple of days how many. We obviously take our time and count in California.
That is Democratic Congressman Robert Garcia, who represents Long Beach, California. He's national co-chair of the Harris-Walz campaign. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And you're listening to live special coverage from NPR News.
And at 6:19, you are listening to your NPR station, News 88.7.
Hey, I'm Kai Wright. Join me every weekend for Notes from America here on News 88.7. Each week, we are seeking real insight on the many tough questions that Americans are asking ourselves right now. And we're creating connection in a divided world. And you're invited. So gather with us, take part in live, intimate conversations, and learn from one another. Notes from America, Sundays at 5 p.m. on News 88.7.
Support comes from Broadway Bank's commercial banking team. Since 1941, committed to helping businesses with their financial needs and growth. More information available at broadway.bank/commercial. Member FDIC.
And then continue straight on.
Support comes from UT Health Houston, home to Dr. Ricardo Mascara, who developed a comprehensive care clinic to improve outcomes for children with complex medical needs.
Straight on.
More at uth.edu/manyfaces. Support comes from the Elizabeth D. Rockwell Center at the Hobby School of Public Affairs, presenting The State of American Democracy, a lecture with former Congressman Adam Kinzinger, November 13th at the University of Houston. More at uh.edu/hobby.
And on the freeways, got a couple of problems on the North Freeway southbound at Little York. I reckon the 2 left lanes, and northbound after the Grand Parkway, I reckon 3 lanes. Mid 620.
Support for NPR's elections coverage comes from Saatva, committed to making handcrafted mattresses that help lull people to sleep and keep them sleeping soundly. More information is at saatva.com/NPR.
It's election night 2024. We are waiting to see who will lead this country into its next chapter. I'm Ari Shapiro.
And I'm Juana Summers. And if you are just joining us, we have our earliest race calls of the night for 3 states. The Associated Press has called Kentucky and Indiana for former President Donald Trump. And it has also called the state of Vermont for Vice President Kamala Harris.
As you will continue to hear all night, one candidate needs to get to a total of 270 electoral votes to win the race. With these calls so far, Trump has 19 and Harris has 3.
I want to bring back in senior political editor and correspondent Domenico Montanaro. Domenico, I'm curious, as you look at these 7 key states that we continue to talk about that may well decide the presidential race, is there a state or two that jumps out to you in this early hour that you're particularly keeping your eye on?
Well, early on, North Carolina and Georgia are going to be 2 states that, I'm going to be looking at. Virginia as well, even though Virginia is a lean Democratic state. Georgia and North Carolina should have polls that close fairly quickly, and they'll be able to count fairly quickly this time around. It looks like with Georgia in some of the early exit polling, is suggesting at least a little bit of an edge for Harris in the state, or for Trump in the state, given that some 51%, I think it was, in one of the CNN exits that CNN reported was that they trust Trump more in a crisis. So that's one thing that some Democrats, at least right now, have it's jumped out to them as one number that they're a little unsure of. But we have to remember these are very early. They do change through the night. Exit polls are usually best later on in the evening when they're matched to the results finally. So it's not a whole lot that can be said just yet from anything like that.
I want to bring in Franco Ordonez, who is at Trump campaign headquarters at Mar-a-Lago in Florida, our White House correspondent down there. Franco, we are obviously still waiting for results tonight, but tell us about what the Trump campaign is looking at and how they are approaching tonight. Franco, do we have you?
Yes, I'm here now.
Okay, tell us about how the Trump campaign is looking at tonight and what they're watching for, how they're approaching it.
Well, I think there's kind of a mix of excitement as well as a little bit of anxiety and uncertainty. You know, when I talk to the campaign, they project a lot of confidence. They point to polls that show that former President Donald Trump is doing better than he did in 2020 and 2016. And he did. I mean, so often in the past, he has been behind. And that's very actually typical of Republican presidential candidates. When I talk to strategists, they do say that President Trump or former President Trump is doing better than past Republican candidates like John McCain, for example. You know, there has been a shift in the last couple of weeks, and I think you see that with kind of the rising or, you know, Harris moving up in the polls. And we're also hearing it in Trump's rhetoric. While the Trump campaign projects a lot of confidence and they talk about a strong border and they talk about strong economy, we're hearing more and more from Trump kind of going through his grievances, talking about election fraud, talking about political attacks on his political enemies. And as we know from the past and from having covered former President Trump for such a long time, that's often at times he feels vulnerable. And all this talk about election fraud, a lot of analysts are feeling that this is kind of setting up potential arguments. Trump himself has talked about lawyers being such a key part of this election today.
You know, Franco, a question that Trump has been asked repeatedly and again was asked today was, if he loses this election, will he concede? Can you tell us about how he's been approaching and how his campaign has been approaching that question, particularly in light of what we saw 4 years ago with January 6th?
Yeah, they will not answer that question. Trump will not answer that question. We pushed his campaign manager, his senior advisor on the trail this week about this weekend about it. And they will simply not say that. I mean, the way they talk about it is, look, we're not going to talk about losing. That they insist that Trump is going to win. They're not even going to acknowledge the potential that he may lose. But we also know that election integrity has been such a key part of this campaign. I mean, they've spent so much. One of the big criticisms of this campaign is that they have spent so much more resources on election integrity and
election
less
integrity,
on get out
which
the
we should
vote.
say is a phrase to describe, in many cases, false claims of voter fraud.
Absolutely, and they're spending so much. I mean, hiring lawyers, filing early suits. At the same time, the big concern that many Republicans have about this campaign is they're not doing, equivalent type work of getting out the vote. They've outsourced their door knocking, for example, and there's a lot of concerns that the priorities are not in the right place.
Let's go now to Georgia. That's where NPR campaign reporter Stephen Fowler is. Hi, Stephen.
Hello.
So, Stephen, I just want to start with voting itself. Voting correspondent Miles Parks mentioned earlier that there have been some bomb threats affecting some places in the country, including Georgia. Briefly, just tell us how local officials are responding.
So these threats have been handled pretty swiftly. They've evacuated polling places, they've swept equipment, they've done everything. They determined quickly that they were non-credible threats, and then in just about every case I've seen so far, a court has extended voting in those precincts. It's few and far between, and these are places where by and large most people have voted early, so we're not talking about large numbers of people affected.
Any sense as to whether these threats have had an impact on turnout there in the affected areas in Georgia?
Well, some of the questions that people I've talked to have been wondering is worried about suppressing the vote and people being afraid to show up to the polls. That hasn't really been the case. I mean, Georgia has record turnout from early voting heading into this election, and the last briefing that I heard from Georgia's Secretary of State is they expect a strong Election Day turnout to lead to record overall turnout. So if there's one thing Georgians are good at doing, it's voting. We've done it a lot lately, and they did it a lot in this election, too.
I want to think back about some history here. I mean, Georgia has been a hotly contested state, but it used to be reliably red. Tell us about the dynamics there. What's changed?
Georgia has been one of the fastest growing states in the country. It's been led by Republicans for decades, but it's recruited a lot of economic groups and industries that have brought people that don't typically vote for Democrats. Georgia's become younger, it's become more diverse, it's become more competitive as a result. And so what you have is 2 Democratic U.S. senators and a Republican state government, and in 2020, narrowly voting for Joe Biden. That's why this is one of the most tightly contested swing states this time.
I mean, this is a state that Democrats and Republicans have just poured a ton of resources in, that both candidates have spent a ton of time in. Can you just contrast for us how the Trump campaign and the Harris campaign have been approaching that state?
Yeah, so both campaigns recognize that Georgia represents some of the biggest opportunities for them, but also the biggest challenges. The Trump campaign has really dug into their Trump Force 47 organizing model, which is leaning into grassroots, everyday voters that are super excited to go to their friends, their neighbors, their coworkers, and get them to vote, as opposed to hiring outside groups to come in and canvass and door knock, because they say that Donald Trump is the biggest get out the vote thing that they have. And the Harris campaign is being a lot more reactive to all of the different types of constituencies that they used in 2020 for Biden to win, but also that they need this time. They are opening campaign offices in rural Republican areas. They're turning out the vote in Atlanta's big urban core. They're doing things for non-white voters and young voters, and any constituency you could think of, they are blanketing the state with those advertisements, because in a state that was decided by less than 12,000 votes, any tight, slight shift in margin among any one of those groups could be the difference in 16 electoral votes.
I want to bring in our NPR senior editor and correspondent, Ron Elving, for some historical context on this election. Hi, Ron.
Good to be with you, Ari.
Journalists tend to use the term unprecedented a lot. Talk about, from a historical perspective, what are the actual firsts in this election?
This is an election where we have a candidate who is African American and Indian descent and a woman at the same time. That is perhaps in some respects overlooked a little bit, because in 2016 we talked a lot about Hillary Clinton being prospectively the first woman president. That has not been as salient for many people in the 2024 election cycle, although the abortion issue has certainly produced a dramatic gender split, and we don't know just how wide it will be, but in some states it's been running something like 55-45, women favoring Harris, and something very similar in favor of Trump among men. So the factor of gender here is not unprecedented in the sense of 2016, but should Harris prevail, she would be the first woman president. That's certainly a first.
The Harris campaign has often said that democracy itself is on the ballot. To what extent is that actually grounded in reality?
There is a substantial sense of doubt about Donald Trump's attitude towards the normal voting procedures and their legitimacy. All through the 2016 campaign, before he had ever actually been on the ballot yet as a presidential campaign, as a presidential candidate, he was saying that the vote was rigged. He was saying that he was sure that if he lost, it would be because the vote was rigged, offering no reason to think that and offering no evidence for it, but it was a campaign theme. It dropped away a bit when he was elected in 2016 in the Electoral College, but he continued to insist he would have won the popular vote as well had it not been rigged against him. Well, we certainly saw that again in 2020 when he continued to deny that he had lost the election. And in fact, we had that attempt to overthrow the results of the election on January 6, 2021, when Congress was certifying those results.
Ron Elving, I'm going to jump in here for just a second and turn it over to Domenica Montanaro, because we have a race call.
Well, not a surprise here, but Donald Trump has won West Virginia. The Associated Press has called. That puts Trump at 23, Harris at 3. But again, West Virginia, one of those states Trump won by, maybe his widest margin in 2020. So, this is expected. Also to be seen in the state, the Senate race there is going to be a flip, where the Republican who's running, the Governor Jim Justice for the Senate, going to be likely the next senator from the state, which will be a flip where Joe Manchin was a Democrat. Now it's going to be a Republican seat most likely, and that will mean that Republicans will need just one more state to pick up the Senate tonight. And that's what most people are expecting, that they'll be able to pull that off and control the Senate.
Our colleague Ron Elving was just mentioning gender, and I want to dig into that a little bit more, because one of the striking parts of Vice President Harris's campaign is how little she talked about her identity and her gender in comparison to Hillary Clinton back in 2016, as well as compared to her opponent, former President Donald Trump, Tamara Keefe, Daniel Kurtzleben. You've both been tracking this. Let's start with this question. Given the historic nature of Harris's candidacy, why do you think it is that she chose to focus on other things? Who goes first?
So this is very much central to who Vice President Harris is and has been throughout her political career. She has often been asked, well, what is it like to be the first woman, whatever? And she says, well, I've been a woman all my life. Or she will say, you know, it's apparent as soon as I walk in the room that I am a woman of color. I don't need to talk about it. And she is quite resistant to talking about it. I don't think that this is like an overcorrection for Hillary Clinton, who wore white on big nights in honor of the suffragist movement. I think that this is just a different person running for the highest office in the land.
Two more things, I think. One is, this is an educated guess on my part, but if you're a Democrat running for the presidency and you're a woman, I mean, Democrats already have an uphill battle with men. And so perhaps stressing I am a woman makes it even harder to win those men. And men have been a huge narrative in this election because Democrats' problems with them and how Trump is doing quite well with them. Besides that, one thing that has changed since Hillary Clinton ran for the presidency is Dobbs. I feel like there is also much more reason.
The Supreme Court decision on abortion.
Absolutely, yes, thank you. I feel like there is much more reason for a candidate to focus on the women they are trying to win than their own gender.
And just another note on that, and Danielle can speak to this more than I can, but Trump has put so much emphasis on winning men, down to Stephen Miller, one of his White House advisors back in the day, tweeted earlier today, like not that long ago, if you know any men who haven't voted, get them to the polls.
It doesn't get any more straightforward than that. The Trump campaign knows what they're trying to do here.
We're going to jump in real quickly. We're going to take a brief pause. We're going to keep giving you live analysis, more results as we keep having this conversation. We'll talk more about both candidates as well as the race for the control of Congress, closely watching that balance of power there. Stick with us. You are listening to live special coverage from NPR News.
Go straight on.
This is Election 2024 here on News 88.7. Good evening, I'm Gail DeLauder.
And good evening, I'm Matt Thomas. Polls close in just about 25 minutes on this historic election day. After some early morning thunderstorms, things have gone smoothly at polling locations across the area with no major issues reported.
News 88.7's Tom Peruvian has been visiting polling locations around the city, and right now he joins us live from NRG Arena, where people are still lining up to vote. And Tom, what are you seeing out there in terms of lines right now?
There are no lines here at NRG Arena. People are streaming in, voting, and streaming out as we push into the last 30 minutes of election 2024. Why is that the case? NRG Arena vote polling place is one of the largest in Harris County. They've got over 60 voting machines, and crowds just have not been a problem. I talked to one polling person who said they maybe had 3 lines with a little more than 10 people in them all day long. So if you're looking for a place to vote, the clock is running down, you can always choose NRG Arena to come and vote. So be ready. We'll make it just in time. As far as voting and folks who have been here throughout the day, the rain this morning certainly didn't help the numbers. Rain did stop and the sun did come out here at NRG, and numbers picked up as they moved through the day. So if you are looking to once again get your vote cast, if you're a little far from home, or a little far from your voting center,
go straight
NRG Arena, which is just behind NRG Stadium, is where you want to come. Reporting from NRG Arena, I'm Tom Peruvian, News 88.7.
More than 1.2 million people in Harris County voted early in this election, and that's expected to be the vast majority of the votes cast locally. Those votes will be counted at the county's vote tabulation center in North Harris County later this evening after the polls close. Harris County Clerk Tanisha Hudspeth says that will be the center of activity later tonight.
This is where all information in regards to results will come out of. So a good amount of operational systems are happening here. We're supporting everything in the field, and in the field is more than 12,000 election workers.
Hudspeth says all 700 voting locations across the county were oversupplied with ballot paper and voting machines, and there have been no widespread voting issues so far today.
Now, one of the big issues on the local ballot is HISD's $4.4 billion bond. It's the biggest school bond ever in Texas. The district says it needs some money for facilities upgrades around the district. And we talked to voters at the polls today about their thoughts on the bond.
I always want to fund schools. I always want to, especially here in Houston, look after our flood infrastructure.
I'm all for education, but I don't trust them with the money.
You got to invest in the kids. You got to put the money back into the school and make sure that they got the proper way to be educated, because that's really important nowadays.
Voter Story Hawkins cast a ballot at NRG Arena, where Tom was earlier. She says there is a sense of urgency this election.
I just think that everybody needs to, especially in this election, there's so much at stake, including democracy. So it's very important to get out to vote today, to let your voice be heard, and to keep our democratic nation going.
So again, polls close in about 20 minutes. Now, if you're in line at 7 o'clock, you still will be allowed to cast your ballot. Some of the races we're tracking include the Harris County DA's race, the Senate race between Ted Cruz and Colin Allred, and a number of other local, state, and local races that are taking place today. So stay with us for complete results this evening as we keep getting those results in.
And the Texas Standard is airing a special coming up at 7 o'clock, and more from NPR throughout the night here on News 88.7.
On the roads, we now have a pair of problems on 45. The older one was heading in southbound 45 at Little York, left and center lane blocked with a wreck there. Now we have one heading out northbound 45 at Tidwell. 2 right lanes are taken up. And, well, actually, we now have a trifecta because we have 3. One of the older ones, northbound 45 after 99, the Grand Parkway, left and 2 center lanes are taken up there. It'll be cloudy overnight with a low around 62. Tomorrow should be pleasant, at least outside, regardless what happens. Mostly sunny skies and highs right around 80. Right now it's 74 degrees here at the UH campus at 6:40.
When possible.
Support for NPR's elections coverage comes from Hiscox, committed to helping small businesses protect their dreams. Quotes and information on customized insurance for specific risks are available at hiscox.com. Hiscox, business insurance experts.
This is live special coverage of Election Night 2024 from NPR News. I'm Juana Summers.
And I'm Ari Shapiro. If you're just joining us, polls have closed in parts of the eastern U.S., and the Associated Press has made calls in some of the earliest states. Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump has won Kentucky, Indiana, and West Virginia. No surprises there. Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris has won Vermont as expected.
So far, the vote tally is former President Trump with 23 electoral votes and Vice President Harris has 3. One candidate needs to get a total of 270 electoral votes to win the race. And as of 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, polls have closed in the key swing states of Georgia and North Carolina.
We'll be hearing from those states soon, and NPR will bring you the latest updates as polls continue to close across the country. Now I want to bring back in NPR senior political editor and correspondent Domenico Montanaro. What's the latest on what we know at this point in the night?
Well, what we know is not much at this point in the night, right? I mean, you have a few states that have closed and been called for either candidate. Indiana, Kentucky, and West Virginia. The Associated Press has called for Donald Trump. Vermont has been called for Kamala Harris. We've seen a lot of vote in a state like Florida, however. 75% of the vote is in Florida. Trump is leading there 54-45, which would be wider than what that Donald Trump won it by in 2020 against Joe Biden. A place like Miami-Dade County, for example, going slightly wider margin for Trump than it did in 2020, and some of the Democratic counties going by less for Kamala Harris. But it's a little different this time around because, Florida is a really expensive state to advertise in, and neither campaign spent really almost anything in the state. It was basically ceded from the Harris campaign to Trump, suggesting that they really are focusing all of their eggs, both campaigns, in those 7 key states that we've been talking about.
Let's go now to one of those key states. We are headed to Wisconsin to chat with Republican Senator Ron Johnson. He's held a seat there since 2011. He is a supporter of former President Trump's campaign, and he joins us now. Welcome, Senator.
Hello, good evening.
Senator, in the past 2 presidential elections, your state has picked the winning candidate, former President Trump in 2016, then candidate Trump, and Biden in 2020. Tell us how you think your state will vote tonight and why.
Optimistic reports coming in from rural counties. Turnout's pretty heavy there, particularly among younger voters. That's a good sign for us. We are a little concerned right after this interview. I'm going to go down to Milwaukee, the central count, where there's been delays in voting. Machine back popped open. They had to reset the counters, and they're counting over again. Now they're saying we're not going to get the results till wee hours in the morning. So I'm going to head down with our state party chair, and we're going to just what's happening and talk to our poll workers and poll observers.
Let me ask you this. In speaking to some other outlets this cycle, you've so far refused to say that you will absolutely accept the results of this election unless everything is, quote, honest. Can you just explain for us what to you would indicate a dishonest election result?
Well, first, I want to have confidence that no matter who wins, that I have I view it as a legitimate result, and that's what I want, to restore confidence in every American, that they have that same thing. My concern is that Democrats oppose every control, every law, every measure that would restore confidence. For example, they oppose voter ID, even though more than 80% of Americans agree with that. They opposed to the SAVE Act that would have required proof of citizenship. So, again, you have to ask the question, why do Democrats oppose the measures that would restore that confidence? So when you're asked the hypothetical question, are you going to accept the results? Well, you can't answer that question. I am a little concerned. We have the Democrat chair of the Wisconsin Democrat Party predicting that you're going to see a red mirage in the wee hours of the morning. It's going to flip and Kamala Harris is going to win Wisconsin. Now, how could he be predicting that? And then you throw on top of that, now all of a sudden Milwaukee, very slow initially counting. They started late, long lunch, and the backs of the machines popped open, so they had to redo the count. And now they're saying they're not going to complete until the wee hours in the morning. It doesn't exactly instill a lot of confidence.
Let me jump in.
I'm going down there to investigate.
Okay. Understood. One more question on this issue. The director of the United States Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Agency has said repeatedly that the nation's election infrastructure is more secure than ever. Have you seen credible evidence to the contrary?
Well, the former head of CISA lied to me repeatedly, saying these machines were never held up to the internet. So I'm not necessarily going to take the word of the current head of CISA under the Biden administration either.
I want to talk about some issues down ballot. Your state also has a toss-up Senate race between incumbent Democrat Tammy Baldwin, Republican businessman Eric Hovde. You served as senator alongside Senator Baldwin for nearly a decade. From what you've seen and what you know, will the Hovde campaign win Wisconsin and secure a Republican majority in the upper chamber?
I think a lot depends on how well President Trump does. Right now, it looks like he's doing well. We certainly have all the passion on our side because our supporters truly do believe this is a make-or-break moment for this country. The Democrat governments have put this nation on a path of destruction, the open borders, 40-year high inflation, the endless wars of the political flames. So I don't know how much worse it needs to get. So if President Trump does well, I'm hoping he does. I think we'll have a new senator here, Eric Hovde.
Look, I don't have to tell you this. The polls are tight there in Wisconsin, as they have been in a number of key states across the country. Is there one issue there that sticks out to you for voters in your state that you think could really be the one that will tip things one way or the other there?
Yeah, because of the devaluation of the dollar, the inflation of Biden-Harris, It's costing Wisconsin families $1,000 more per month just to maintain the cross-voting they had at the start of the Biden administration. Plus, the open borders, the flood of fentanyl poisoning our streets. Again, Democrat governance has been a disaster. I don't know how worse it really needs to get before people realize you got to vote for a change.
You're a supporter, of course, of former President Trump, and I do have to ask you, in the closing days of this campaign, some of his message it's gotten quite dark. He's not been talking about things like immigration, things about the economy, things that Republicans have said are a winning message for him. He's been using personal insults against his Democratic challenger, Vice President Kamala Harris, among other things. Does any of that worry you? Do you feel like opinions about this president are so baked in that doesn't really sway the vote one way or another?
Well, first of all, I've been in this rally since talked endlessly about the open borders and how, destructive the Harris policies have been toward this nation. So that has been the message.
But he's also using expletives about the former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and making personal attacks against Vice President Harris.
I've certainly noticed how President Biden said that, Republican supporters are garbage, potential domestic terrorists, just like Hillary Clinton called us deplorable as well. So I guess that comes from both sides. But no, President Trump has basically been, on message. We need to secure our border. We need to, fix our fiscal situation. We need to end these endless wars.
That we've been speaking with Wisconsin Republican Senator Ron Johnson. Senator Johnson, thank you for your time.
Good evening.
And our voting correspondent, Miles Parks, is here in the studio. Miles, I'd love for you to fact-check some of the claims that Senator Johnson just made about election integrity and the voting process. What did you hear?
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot there to kind of dig into. I think one of the issues I wanted to focus on, first of all, is there is this issue that we are kind of monitoring in Milwaukee where it seems like human error did mean that one of the vote tabulators, a door that was supposed to be closed, was not closed this morning. And so they are going to, out of an abundance of caution, recount these 30,000 ballots there. But there has been no sign at all that means the process is fraudulent or rigged or anything like that. The other claim that I heard Senator Johnson make that I just kind of wanted to zoom out a little bit on is he noted, I couldn't exactly understand what he was saying, that Chris Krebs, the former head of the Department of Homeland Security's Election Security Agency, lied to him about voting machines being connected to the internet. Voting machines in the U.S. are not connected to the internet, first of all. And second of all, more importantly, 98% of American voters vote on paper ballots. And those paper ballots are then audited after the fact to make sure that there isn't some sort of hacking or foreign or domestic interference. And so I think that context is just really important when people hear something about voting machines being connected to the internet. What election officials say is if you're voting on paper and that paper is checked after the fact, it really doesn't matter whether the voting machines are secure, though they are.
I just want to know we have a race result here. West Virginia's Republican Governor Jim Justice has won the race for the open U.S. Senate seat in that conservative state, according to a call by the Associated Press. Justice was expected to win. This is a seat held by retiring Senator Joe Manchin, a conservative Democrat, so it is a pickup for Republicans as they seek to gain control of the Senate. I want to go now to Georgia. Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, who is with us, because this morning threats briefly disrupted voting at 2 Georgia polling places, and Secretary Raffensperger is with us from the State House to tell us more about that. Thank you for being with us.
My pleasure. Good to be with you.
To begin, what more can you tell us about those threats that apparently originated from Russia?
Well, we dealt with it. Ended up with about 12 precincts that had to stay open a little bit later just due to some of the threats, but they had to make sure that the dogs that went through there and make sure it was clear. But at the end of the day, we had record turnout. We're over 5,222,397 votes were cast today on the early voting period we had, and also absentees accepted so far. So we're just waiting for any absentee ballots that came in today, and then any new count of overseas military ballots. There's about 10,000, 15,000 those that will come in for the rest of the week. But here we go, and we're starting to upload numbers.
Yeah, so how long do you think that's likely to take, especially with record turnout, especially if the vote is close?
Well, we put in the state law that once the precincts close, once the counties are done, they have 1 hour from the times that they're closed to upload all the results from early voting, which is probably about 65%, and then also the absentee voting, 70%. So within the next 30 minutes to 45 minutes, we should have all of that uploaded, and that should be that 65 to 70% of the votes. It's very, now we've already shown 1 million people results on our leaderboard, and so you can see how that's happening. And so we've got 4 million people that voted early, so we've got 3 million more to get posted up there.
I want to ask you about 4 years ago, because in January of 2021, Trump called you and asked you to find 11,780 votes and declare him the winner. You appropriately refused, and yet he has continued to insist that the only way he could lose this election is if the other side cheats, which of course is false. Do you think our democracy is stronger than it was 4 years ago? Are we more prepared to withstand those kinds of assaults on our election system if they happen again?
I think America's strong, and I've led the way to make sure that Georgia has the most secure, free, and fair place to vote in the United States. We have done 2 audits of citizenship to make sure only American citizens are on the voter rolls. We have photo ID for all forms of voting in Georgia. That includes absentee voting. And we're part of a multi-state organization, so we can update our voter rolls objectively. And today, we had our line wait times were 2 minutes. Got down to 1 minute at one point. And we were checking in voters when they got to the front of the line in 49 seconds. So 3 minutes to 5 minutes, and you were ready to go to the voting machine and cast your ballot. So it's been a great experience for voters, and we've had great turnout.
Has it been a great experience for election workers? They have been under a lot of pressure this election cycle, under a lot of scrutiny. What have the last few weeks been like for your coworkers?
I think it's been great. Their spirits are high. In fact, I visited the Palms Library in the Atlanta area and met the poll manager. She had been doing this job for over 20 years, and she came back after 2020. She didn't quit and run. And then I asked other folks how long they've been doing it. 10 years, 7 years, things like that. So they had an experienced staff there. So people did return. A few people after COVID, decided that, well, I'm concerned about my health and maybe, but we replaced all those poll workers with a fresh crop and dedicated to making sure we had a fair, honest, accurate election here in Georgia.
I'm curious, for the last few years, we have seen so much pressure on election workers, and you seem to be saying, everything went great, nothing to see here, it's all good. Were those pressures just vanished on Election Day? Like, what happened?
Well, we've been working with the General Assembly, with our governor, to make sure that we could increase voter trust. One of those, I think, was making sure we had photo ID for all forms of voting. So when we added voter ID for absentee voting, we actually modeled it after Minnesota, who's been doing that for at least 10, 15 years now. And so that's secured, added more security and also, I think, increased voter trust. Then if you look at our voter rolls, we have the cleanest ones in the country because we're part of a multi-state organization. Yes. We get the updated voter records for people get a driver's license in other states. So we get that kind of information.
All right.
But then we're also improving the process because we kept lines short, and we think that's important. It doesn't have to be a shorter vote to keep those lines short.
Thank you so much. That is Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, a Republican. We appreciate your time today.
Thanks. Take care.
And you're listening to live special coverage of Election Night 2024 from NPR News.
Let's bring in NPR political reporter Stephen Fowler, who is also in Georgia. Stephen, first I just want to ask you, as we were listening to Georgia's Secretary of State there, anything that stuck out to you given your reporting in the state?
It is a night and day difference for Georgia elections from 4 years ago, 6 years ago. Georgia was in the news for long lines and issues with mail ballots, and then in 2020 there was more long lines, more issues with COVID and everything, but this was a well-oiled, well-run election. There were very few problems. There was record turnout. There is very quick results pouring in. I've got the Secretary of State's results sitting in front of me, and there are hundreds of thousands of votes being updated in real time.
Well, what can you tell us about those vote totals, Stephen?
Well, it's a little bit of a mixture right now, Juana, because we saw in Georgia a shift in how to show up at the end of early voting and are now showing up on Election Day. But Republicans took Donald Trump's questions and his urging to bank your vote and show up early. They really took it to heart. And in the first couple of days of early voting, we saw a big turnout surge in rural Republican areas. So the patterns of votes coming in aren't what we typically expect to see. So some places look a little bit redder than they might end up being. Some places look a little bluer than they might end up being. So the good news is that Raffensperger said we should have probably 75% of Georgia's vote totals in the next, 20 to 30 minutes or so. So we should have a pretty good idea of where things are heading.
All right, and while we wait, I do want to ask you about the presidential race. I understand that you were at the closing events in Georgia for both Vice President Harris and former President Trump. For each of them, how did they make their closing argument to voters there?
Trump's argument is basically the same argument that he has made for the last 4 years, that the Democratic control of the White House is terrible for America, that immigration is out of control because of Democratic policies, that his election was stolen from him in Georgia and nationally, which is not the case, and this sort of doom and gloom vision, Kamala broke it, I can fix it. That's resonated a lot with his core supporters in Georgia, but alienated a lot more moderate voters. We saw that in Georgia's 2022 elections, where voters rejected the Republican Senate candidate aligned with Trump and elected a Democrat, but then elected Republican Governor Brian Kemp to a second term. And Harris's message really resonated in Georgia with this message of turning the page on Trump. Trump faces criminal charges here in Georgia for his failed efforts to overturn the election. And so another thing that Harris mentioned also was abortion rights. Georgia has a strict abortion ban in place. And so, her overall national message especially resonates in Georgia on those two fronts.
That is NPR's Stephen Fowler in Georgia. Stephen, we'll talk more soon.
Thank you.
And we will have a lot more coverage, a lot more analysis as we continue to watch the results come in. You are listening to live special coverage from NPR News.
We're a minute and a half away from 7 o'clock here on your NPR station, News 88.7.
I'm Jeremy Hobson. Next time on The Middle, we're taking your calls and making sense of it all. What are your post-election hopes for the future? Joining us, CBS News Chief Washington Correspondent Major Garrett and journalist Rose Scott at WABE in Atlanta. Plus your calls at 844-4-MIDDLE. That's next time on The Middle.
That's coming your way Thursday evening at 8 o'clock here on News 88.7. Support comes from members like you and from Senior Health Services, helping Houston area seniors who are concerned about changes in their Medicare plan by providing a variety of options, including Medicare supplements, Medicare Advantage, and Part D drug plans. More at seniorhealthservices.com. And from HealthLink Advisors, preparing hospitals for cyber attacks and resulting downtime with clinical-led business continuity services designed to ensure continuous patient care and operations. More at HealthLinkAdvisors.com. Out on the freeways are two of our earlier problems on the North Freeway have cleared northbound at Tidwell, southbound at Little York, but now we have a much more serious problem. Northbound 45, all main lanes blocked right after 99 Grand Parkway. You're going to be solid at least to Cypress Fork. 74 degrees right now here at the UH campus on your NPR station, KUHF Houston News 88.7 in service of the University of Houston. It's 7 o'clock.
State right now. You know what that means? It's Texas Standard Time.
Texas Standard is a production of KUT Austin, KERA North Texas, Houston Public Media, and Texas Public Radio in San Antonio.
I'm David Brown. Coming up, an expert panel including reporters from the statewide Texas newsroom and some of the top experts who've spent the day monitoring the turnout. Early indicators in some of the key contests on the ballot today for Texans, including U.S. President, Texas's U.S. Senate race, Texas House races, possibility of the first Democrat in recent years elected to the Texas Supreme Court. Well, we'll be checking in with political consultants from both of the major parties. A running check as votes come trickling in. It's the place to be on this election night 2024, and we're just getting started right after this.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Jack Spear. Another big batch of poll closings at this hour, but of the 16 states in the District of Columbia, none has more weight than Pennsylvania with its 19 electoral votes. NPR's White House correspondent Tamara Keith joins me now. Tam, polls have now mostly closed in Pennsylvania, the state which has seen the most campaign spending by both candidates. Why is it this state so critical?
Math. Simple math. It has 19 electoral votes. It's a state that Trump won in 2016, that Biden won in 2020, and could easily swing either direction this year. It is one of those states that is just incredibly close in the polls, and now we're finally going to start seeing results. But not that quickly, because Pennsylvania is one of those states that doesn't allow election workers to begin counting ballots, absentee and mail ballots, until Election Day itself. So we are expecting results coming in from Pennsylvania to come in slowly. You might remember Pennsylvania wasn't called until Saturday after the election 4 years ago.
Yeah, 4 days. I mean, this is the big prize, though. This is the one they both want, right?
And they are spending so much time there. I can't tell you how many times I've been to Pennsylvania in the last 3 months, but it's a lot. And they are spending time, they are spending money. It is clear that the Keystone State is the key, because if Trump can win Pennsylvania, then he deprives Harris of many paths to that 270 electoral votes. And if Harris can lock up the blue wall, she's essentially won.
And what else are you going to be watching tonight?
Well, I will be watching North Carolina and Georgia. Those are two states where we are likely to get more results more quickly. And of course, there are a number of congressional races. We won't know control of the House probably for maybe a week, because California, again, counts its votes pretty slowly, and several of the key races are out in California.
All right, NPR's Tamara Keith. Thank you, Tam. One message likely to be repeated over and over as the vote counting begins in this 2024 election is that it may be a while, as we said before, the final results of these races are known. What pollsters call a blue shift or a red mirage, the idea of states that appear to be going one way can change direction as more precincts report. And states that have been called as of this hour, Donald Trump has won Kentucky, Indiana, West Virginia, and, according to the Associated Press, at the state of Florida, and also the Associated Press has called the race for Kamala Harris in Vermont. Also in the first flip of a Senate seat, the Associated Press calling the race for Republican Jim Justice in West Virginia. We'll be keeping an eye on all of these races and many more as the evening goes on, but we have more polls that have been closing, and more polls will be closing in the next hour as well, so stay tuned. You're listening to NPR. Wisconsin is a key swing state in this year's election. It's been decided by less than 1 percentage point in 4 of the last 6 presidential races. Wine Silver member station WWM spoke to voters there.
At a polling place in a predominantly black neighborhood, 25-year-old Keshania Johnson was pushing her niece in a stroller after she voted for the first time. She was not sure if she was going to vote, but she was nudged to do so by friends and family.
I just want to see a lady be in the seat. I just want something different. We always had a man in the seat. Why we can't get a lady in the seat?
Miles away in the suburb of Waukesha County, the heart of Wisconsin's Republican Party, businessman Ken Robinson says he voted early for Trump.
I don't think we have the best candidates to choose from in this election, but it's an easy choice between Harris and Trump.
Small shifts in the voting blocks could decide if Trump or Harris wins Wisconsin. For NPR News, I'm Ayan Silver in Milwaukee.
And the Associated Press is making more race calls at this hour, calling Massachusetts, Maryland, and Rhode Island for Democrat Kamala Harris. While much of this election day is focused on the top of the ticket and crucial House and Senate races, there are also some major ballot initiatives being decided across the country. 10 states have measures dealing with abortion or reproductive rights before the electorate. There are also half a dozen measures dealing with legalization of marijuana for recreational or medical use. The West Virginia measure would ban physician-assisted suicide. More polls will be closing, as we mentioned, in the 9 o'clock hour. Those include two key swing states, Arizona and Michigan. I'm Jack Spear, NPR News in Washington.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include National Geographic documentary films presenting Endurance. Endurance follows a team of modern-day explorers who face the Herculean task of finding Sir Ernest Shackleton's famous sunken ship. Now streaming on Hulu and Disney+.
Freeway's got a big problem on the North Freeway, northbound 45, right after 99 the Grand Parkway. All main lanes are shut down. It looks like you're going to be solid by the time you get to Louetta, if not a bit before that. We'll have mostly cloudy skies overnight with a low of 62. Sunny and quite pleasant tomorrow with a high of 80. Right now it's 72 degrees here at the UH campus, and you're listening to continuous special live coverage of election night. Here on your NPR station, News 88.7. It's 7:06.
If all has gone according to plan, as we believe it has, most of the polls in Texas closed about 6.5 minutes ago. And voters in El Paso on Mountain Time, you've got a little less than 53 minutes to get in line. If you're there by 7, well, you'll get to cast a ballot. No excuses. It's Texas Standard Time on this election night in the Lone Star State. I'm David Brown coming to you from Texas Standard Central in the Texas capital city, our home station KUT in Austin. We have reporters at Houston Public Media, Texas Public Radio in San Antonio, KERA in North Texas, KTEP El Paso, our partners in other parts of the state tracking the numbers and the big contests. In about an hour, national coverage from NPR gets underway on most of these stations. We'll be providing Texas updates each hour at about 35 minutes past, so don't touch that dial. Of course, the biggest contest of the night is the one for president, and as we're focused on the Texas vote right now, we're bringing in two longtime politics watchers to bring us up to speed on what we know and what we don't as of this minute. Lauren McGahee is investigative reporter for the Texas Newsroom. Lauren, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Also in the studio, Blaze Gainey. He's Capitol reporter for the Texas Newsroom. Blaze, thanks for joining us.
Happy to be here.
All right, welcome to election night. We're all ready to call it? Woohoo! Yeah. Here we go. Though we're all in for Texas here on the Standard, let's not kid ourselves. The race most of our listeners are watching is the presidential contest, and we need to go there first. What's the latest? I think polls were just closing in many of the states across the nation. I had seen a big red streak over at the New York Times. Lauren, you want to get us started here? What are you hearing about about Texas and the presidential contest?
Yeah, so we're just starting to get in results. Things are going to trickle in. When you look online for the live election results in Texas, you see a lot of the early voting numbers coming in. So these are going to be ballots that have already been cast, over the last week or so. I think it's fair to say that most people expect Texas to go for Trump. We were talking before the broadcast, the last time Texas won for a Democrat was 1976, right?
Jimmy Carter.
With Jimmy Carter. And so I think that isn't going to be a surprise, I don't think, for many folks watching this. But the margins are going to be a big deal. We've seen the margin shrink over time from, like 1.2 million for Romney to 600,000 when Trump ran in 2020 . And so, that's what people are going to be looking for. How competitive is Texas getting when it comes to the president?
That's right. We have a record number of registered voters in Texas right now. A lot of folks have come to the Lone Star State, and I think a lot of people, Blaze, what I think Lauren was sort of getting at is a lot of people wondering about how much women are going to be a factor here in the Texas vote. Nationwide, this has been largely seen as a big feature of what's been happening in this presidential race.
Yeah, I think obviously what happened with Roe v. Wade, a lot of women have...
Dobbs decision,
The Dobbs decision, a lot of women have chosen to take that to the polls. We saw that really shortly after the Dobbs decision, but the true test will be whether or not, 2 years later, that really still holds a lot of weight. I think, when I spoke to people, some people were a little over the issue, for lack of better words, but there were others who were fired up about it, and that was the main thing that made them go out and early vote. And even I went to polls this morning and spoke to people, and that was still fresh on their minds.
Well, I was wondering how much, or is there any way to know at this juncture, Lauren, how much women have been a part of this early vote? Are any numbers out about that right now?
Yeah, there are some numbers being tracked, especially at the county level, to see, the gender divide there. I can't remember the last numbers, but I know we were just looking at El Paso, and that vote was actually skewing more heavily male than it has in the past, and older. Yeah. And some of the early voting tallies that we saw come out over the weekend statewide, we saw Republicans coming out in force early voting. We know that the former president has been encouraging people to vote early. You know, don't wait until Election Day, and that really showed with the early numbers for the folks that have voted in Republican primaries really came out.
Yeah, I know a lot of Republicans were saying in 2020 and 2022 it really hurt them, that messaging from the Republicans.
Right.
Yeah. Now let's move on to some of the, well, I think the most closely watched race in Texas. One that was, at least according to the polls, getting surprisingly close. In fact, some people were saying, what happens in Texas in that U.S. Senate race could actually be determinative of who takes the U.S. Senate. Now, I'm not sure how many people really believe that, or if that was a lot of talk. Blaze, how close is this race between Ted Cruz and Colin Allred, his Democratic challenger?
I mean, I think polls show that it'll be just as close as his race with Beto O'Rourke.
Really?
Yeah, and that was within around 260,000 votes, I think. So, I mean, if this one is closer, if the margins are slimmed any, if the more voting population has changed and leaned more Democrat, then it could be a chance where Allred wins. But most people I've spoken to, political scientists, have said that it's likely that Cruz will still pull out a win tonight. And the biggest thing that will determine whether Cruz wins or not is how big Trump wins by. If he wins by a large amount, then it's likely Cruz will also easily win.
Coattails.
Exactly, but if he wins by a slim margin, slimmer than what we've seen in the past that we just talked about, then it's a possibility that there were some Trump Allred voters, although it's sort of hard to imagine that in reality.
I have to say, Lauren, that when they had the Senate debate, I was surprised by how many people were tuned into that debate. And something else, too, I've been surprised at how aggressive Ted Cruz has been with his advertising during this election season.
He really has. And, if you remember the last time he was up against Beto,
right.
At the beginning, apparently he wasn't sure that the race would be that close. He was thinking he was going to win more easily. Mm-hmm. And then towards the end of the campaign, he really pushed hard in rural Texas. He did a lot of swings through rural counties. He did something similar this time. He hit those counties in the last week or so and really tried to shore up his vote, getting those people to come out and turn out for him, right, and not just think that he was going to win this time around. And so, I'm talking to some, maybe some of the same people Blaze is talking to, but 3 to 5 points. Again, the margins there, just like with President, will show how competitive Texas may be in the future. Compared to what has been in the last
All right,
few
I want to see if either of you will argue with me on this one. Given the state's electoral maps, is it a given? Well, I'm just going to put it out there. Okay. It's a given that Republicans will retain control of both chambers in the legislature. Anyone want to argue with me on that?
No takers over here.
No takers?
I'm just going to remain silent.
Well,
I don't want to argue with you.
No. I don't mean to sound so forceful. But let's talk about what's really at stake here. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people are looking at whether the legislative branch will continue its what seems to be, certainly since the Paxton impeachment trial, a kind of rightward lean more into Abbott and Dan Patrick, Lieutenant Governor, as opposed to the more centrist position of Dave Phelan, who is the Speaker of the House at present. I see you smiling there, though.
Well, so there's a lot of races, especially in the Texas House, that people are keeping an eye on here. But you're right, it's not to see if there's going to be a flip of the balance of power in favor of Democrats. The Republicans have had their hold on both the Texas House and Senate for a while now. But what people are looking for is whether any of the currently up for grabs seats will flip for Democrats. If they can turn over a handful of seats, it will have an effect on policy making next session.
Yeah, there's some conservative Democrats who are retiring.
Yeah, and there's also some inroads that Democrats see or hope that they see. There's some really interesting races in especially North Texas, San Antonio, and down in South Texas that Democrats want to flip those seats, and then Republicans too think that they have a chance to grab some seats for themselves. So it's going to be really telling to see whether they get any wins there.
You know, another question is whether or not Texas's high courts may stay red. Have you heard about this, Blaze?
From what I've heard, they will. From what I've heard, but you always have to wait till elections come out. I think most that I've heard about it is not only will they stay conservative, but what happens once they get into office. I think the Robert Robertson case has come up a lot when that election is talked about in that race, and they could ultimately have some say in what happens with his life.
Yes.
Yeah, people are focusing a lot on the Cruz Allred race because a Democrat hasn't won statewide in Texas for 30 years. But there's all of these other possibilities that Democrats want to grab a statewide seat for the first time, and the courts are one of them. There's 6 judges on the Court of Criminal Appeals and the Texas Supreme Court, the 2 highest courts in the state, and if they can flip one of those, it would be historic. Again, an upward battle for Democrats, but there's a couple of seats that they've really been targeting with a lot of, more money than they usually funnel into judicial races. And yeah, the Robert Robertson case, abortion even, how that's come up even at the state court level, that's, Democrats are hoping that moves people to the polls this time.
Lauren McGahee, investigative reporter for the Texas Newsroom. We've also been speaking with Blaze Gainey, Capitol reporter for the Texas Newsroom. Blaze, Lauren, thanks so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
All righty, let's turn now to hopefully some numbers. Michael Marks is here with us, and he has been tracking what's coming out of the Texas Secretary of State's office. What are you hearing, if anything, yet?
Not a lot, David.
That was rather definitive sounding, yeah.
Very little reportable at this early hour. So before we jump to too many conclusions based off of very few votes, how about I give you a little certainty?
Please.
Here are some members of the Texas delegation to the U.S. House of Representatives who will return to the House of Representatives because they are running uncontested races. Nathaniel Moran, a Republican out of East Texas. He replaced Louis Gohmert an election ago. Al Green, longtime Democratic representative from Houston. August Pfluger, a Republican from the San Angelo area. Ronnie Jackson, a Republican who represents Amarillo and then down to North Dallas. And Joaquin Castro, Democrat from San Antonio. They've had an early night already. They've already popped the champagne, David.
Michael Marks continues to maintain a connection with the Secretary of State's office and other resources as we get a tally of how Texans have voted in 2024. Coming up, political consultants from each of the 2 major parties weigh in on what we know so far about a very consequential election cycle in the Lone Star State and well beyond. There's a whole lot more just ahead. Stay with us.
At 7:19, you're listening to special election coverage here on News Hit 87.
This week in This American Life, everybody knows, depressingly, that we live in a country that is profoundly split. The 2 sides live in 2 different realities, don't agree on the basic facts about election fraud, climate change, the COVID vaccine, so many things. And nobody seems able to bridge the gap. So I was fascinated to hear about somebody, a news source I bet you have not heard of, that does exactly that this week.
This American Life tomorrow night at 9 here on News Hit 87. Out on the road, still have a serious problem heading out on the North Freeway, northbound 45, right after 99 the Grand Parkway. All main lanes are shut down for a wreck there. That happened about an hour and 20 minutes ago. You're going to be solid all the way back to Cypress Wood. And on the West Sam southbound direction, we've got a wreck, a vehicle fire cleanup reported at the off-ramp to I-10, the Katy Freeway. 72 degrees right now here at the UH campus, and it's 7:20 on News 887.
I'm David Brown, and you're listening to live special election night coverage from the Texas Standard. As we wait for early voting counts to come trickling in, we want to take some time to talk to party representatives on both sides of the aisle about their expectations coming out of this election night. First, we turn to Brendan Steinhauser. He's a partner with Steinhauser Strategies and a leading Republican strategist, having worked for campaigns including Texas Senator John Cornyn and Congressman Michael McCall. Brendan, welcome to the Texas Standard.
Thank you for having me.
Having been involved in Republican politics in Texas for many years, you feel like there's been a shift to the right. Some people are wondering if quite the opposite has happened. Well, with so many newcomers to Texas, a lot of them from California and other Democratic states, what are you seeing out there?
Yeah, the state legislature has definitely tacked to the right over the last couple of sessions. I expect that to probably happen again. But yeah, the voters that are moving here from all over the country and frankly from all over the world are changing Texas. We're growing, we're dynamic, we're urbanizing. And so I really think those voters hold the future of Texas in their hands. But from the data that I've seen so far over the last few years, it does appear that they're still giving Republicans the edge, at least for now. And I think that's going to hold up in this election.
Well, you know, what kind of Republicans? I think that's something that you were talking about there. Are we looking at more Trump Republicans in Texas, not so much the party of former Governor Rick Perry or George W. Bush?
It's a really good question. It's kind of a mix, but I will say there are a lot of Republicans who are not as hardcore MAGA as some of the base, but these are folks who are voting very practically on issues that they care about. They're looking at Trump versus Harris and saying they may have preferred a different Republican candidate, but now they're going with Trump because they believe that is their only choice in the race. And I think those voters are really important to the Republican Party for the future of maintaining power in Texas.
You know, I think a lot of people used to look to South Texas to see whether or not the Democratic Party was retaining its hold. That has shifted a bit since 2020 and 2022. What are you looking for as you cast your gaze across the landscape of the Lone Star State? Is there anything in particular that you're thinking of as perhaps a litmus test for the future of Republicans in Texas, intra-party or beyond?
Yeah, I really am looking at a few counties in particular as bellwethers in this election and in the future. Places like Tarrant County, which is Fort Worth and the surrounding suburbs, and then places like Fort Bend County and Williamson County. These are growing areas around some of our major cities. Suburbs, exactly. And, you know, they've swung a little bit here and there, and I'm following those numbers really closely. And really, even when this is all said and done, I'm going to be digging into even the precinct level data to look at how did those particular neighborhoods perform for Republicans or Democrats, because that really is what the future of Texas will depend upon, is how the suburban voters act in our elections.
What does success look like to you tonight?
Well, I think Republicans are expected to win statewide. I think President Trump is likely to win. Senator Cruz, I think, needs to overperform the polls to really be able to consider this a win for him, and I think he will. But I think Republicans want to keep Democratic money out of Texas, and in order to do that, they're going to have to win big, and big is definitely more than 5 points. Big is, you know, sending a message to the Democrats that Texas is going to remain red for some time coming. But, you know, we're going to see what happens tonight and maybe into the early hours of the morning.
Take us behind the scenes there. How does tonight progress for Texas Republicans? What is it that you're looking for writ large? And I part of the reason I'm asking this question is, if you start to see, say, Harris running up the presidential numbers, what does that mean for Texas and politics here?
Well, I think if Harris does overperform in Texas, I think it has as much to do with Donald Trump as it does with Harris. And I think it would be a signal to Republicans that they need to consider other candidates in the future. And I really think, first of all, I think Trump will do well in Texas, so I don't know if that will happen. But if the margin is tight, then I think you're going to hear some Republicans say, okay, he had his time in the party, and now we may want to look to someone in the future who can, continue to make sure that Texas remains red. But again, I think there's a good chance that Trump does as well as he did last time, 4 years ago, but he may not. Harris may overperform. It's going to be really interesting to watch.
We've been speaking with Brendan Steinhauser. He is a Republican strategist and partner with Steinhauser Strategies. Brendan, thanks so much for talking with us. We certainly do appreciate it. And happy election night.
Happy election night.
We'll see who's happiest when this election night is over, that's for sure. We were just checking in on the numbers, how things were looking in terms of the Texas vote overall. Are we getting any sense of how the early vote perhaps is, because I think it's my understanding that if you were in a city, if you were an election official in a city of more than 100,000 in Texas, you could go ahead and start counting those early ballots this morning. I'm hoping that perhaps we have some numbers here, Michael Marks.
There are some numbers starting to come in. We are starting to see the beginnings of what the contours of this election evening, David, with an estimated 34% of the votes according to the Associated Press. Donald Trump leading Kamala Harris in Texas 53.5 percentage points to 45. That Senate race that we were just talking about, David, looking as tight as projected right now. Ted Cruz is leading Colin Allred 49.9% to 48.2%.
Say that one more time.
49.9% to 48.2%.
Okay, I got a credit card I can slip between those two, right?
Well, it may belong to Libertarian Ted Brown, David.
No relation, by the way, folks.
Who is picking up that 1.9% of the vote, and something so close, one wonders what effect a third-party candidate may have.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, these are very early.
Extremely early, yes. Right. We're still waiting for, and we will continue to wait for much of the night for more concrete results to come in.
Right.
Some other races that appear interesting, though, at least based off of these initial observations. For the Texas Congressional District, the race between Pete Sessions and Mark Lorenzen. Pete Sessions, the Republican incumbent there. Right. Well, it was closer a minute ago. This shows the hazard of the small sample size.
Here comes the avalanche, too.
That's exactly right. Yeah, moments ago they were very tight. However, a new batch of votes appears to have come in, and now Sessions is leading that race comfortably. But it's a good lesson in maybe not putting too terribly much stock in the sorts of things we are seeing in the first 90 minutes, 2 hours, that sort of thing, David. Worth noting, we were talking about Tarrant County, North Texas, a bit of a bellwether. So far there, Trump has 52% of the vote, Harris 47%, Cruz 50%, Allred 48%. So President Joe Biden won Tarrant County, as did Beto O'Rourke in his Senate race with Ted Cruz in 2018, although by the absolute slimmest of margins. So we're looking at that. We're also looking at some of those South Texas races. Representative Monica de la Cruz versus Michelle Vallejo, Representative Vicente Gonzalez and Mayra Flores. Still nothing reported yet from the Rio Grande Valley, so we'll be watching closely as those ballots come in.
Absolutely. Michael Marks continues to monitor the tally across the Lone Star State. Don't you go anywhere. We got a whole lot more live coverage from the Texas Standard and our partners statewide as the special edition of the Texas Standard continues on election night.
At 7:29, you're listening to your NPR station, News 88.7.
I'm Jesse Thorne. This week on Bullseye, we're going to wish Weird Al Yankovic a happy birthday.
Well, that's so sweet to hear. Thank you.
Plus, we'll talk with food writer J. Kenji Lopez Alt about one of the most important cooking tools of all time, the wok. That's on the next Bullseye from MaximumFun.org and NPR.
And we'll have that for you Thursday evening at 9 o'clock here on News 88.7. And on the freeways, our news problems on the Katy, heading out westbound I-10, right around Bingle. We've got a left lane blocked with a wreck there, and still with a problem blocking all lanes. Northbound 45, right after 99, the Grand Parkway, you're going to be backed up solid at least to Cypress Wood, and it looks like that is growing a little bit. The good news is, if you can make it to the Hardy, you'll be able to bypass that and rejoin I-45 more or less problem-free. 72 degrees right now here at the UH campus, 62 for the overnight low, 80 for tomorrow's high at 7:30.
Part of the reason I say that.
Live from the Texas newsroom, I'm Alexandra Hart. Polls are now closed in most of the state, and millions of Texans turned out today to vote in national, statewide, and local races. In San Antonio, a voter who calls himself Oliver told Texas Public Radio that the economy was his top priority when casting his ballot.
For us, it's more about trying to start a family and which person will be better with the economy for us, and that's going to be Trump.
Meanwhile, in Austin, Laura Chase told KUT that she voted for Vice President Kamala Harris.
I'm very excited that we have another female presidential candidate, and I think that I
appreciate her views on women's rights.
Polling locations in the far western part of the state on Mountain Time are open for another half hour. Reminder that those who are in line after the polls close are still allowed to cast their ballot as long as they arrive before 7 p.m. local time. If you had any problems while trying to vote today, the Texas Civil Rights Project would like to hear from you. Texas Public Radio's David Martin Davies has more.
The group runs a statewide election protection hotline. Veronica Worms is a staff attorney with the Texas Civil Rights Project and says they've heard from all over the state today.
We get a ton of calls, especially on Election Day, and we get issues ranging from folks having questions about their mail-in ballot, to reports of voter intimidation and electioneering, to long lines of polling place.
If you saw anything concerning about the voting process in your area, Worms asked that you call 866-OUR-VOTE. While it's too late to fix the issue for this election, TCRP is collecting data for an election protection report card to submit to the Texas legislature. I'm David Martin Davies in San Antonio.
Attorneys general from around the country have come out to condemn any potential violence in the aftermath of today's election, regardless of who wins. But as the Texas Newsroom's Rachel Osier-Lindley reports, Texas did not join the group.
From Alabama to Wisconsin to U.S. territories and the District of Columbia, 51 attorneys general signed onto a letter yesterday calling on Americans to respond peacefully to the results of the election. Notably absent from the list, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton. He was one of just 3 state attorneys general, along with AGs in Montana and Indiana, who did not sign on to the letter. All 3 are Republicans. In addition to condemning any acts of violence related to the results, the letter said, quote, "A peaceful transfer of power is the highest testament to the rule of law, a tradition that stands at the heart of our nation's stability."
Paxton's office did not respond to the Texas Newsroom's request for comment. I'm Alexandra Hart.
You're listening to statewide news from public radio stations across Texas. This coverage is only possible because of support from listeners like you. You can help sustain and grow Texas news coverage by donating to your local public radio station today.
33 minutes past the hour, Texas Standard Time. I'm David Brown. On this election day, millions of Texans went to the polls to cast their ballots for president, U.S. Senate, state lawmakers, and a whole lot more. Public radio reporters from across the state were there at the polling places, too, asking voters about their top issues this election, their concerns, who they voted for and against. We're going to be hearing from some of those voters right now. We're going to begin with Randy Nuwozniak and Zoe Wernsman, who cast their ballots in Austin.
My work is 4 days a week, 10 hours, and so I called off of work to be here.
Well, I think given the fact that our democracy is on the line, well, I'll just say it, if Trump wins this election, there's a good chance that Christian nationalists will be running much of the apparatus of the government, and so that frightens me.
No, I completely agree with everything he said. I believe that if Trump wins, he is going to use the power in his capabilities to overthrow the government, much like he tried to do with January 6th.
And now that he kind of is above the law, he has a lot more power than any president.